Millionaire despised his forced bride, until their wedding night revealed she was pure and innocent. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew this day would come, but knowing didn't make it easier. Isabella Carter stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, adjusting the delicate pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The ivory silk dress hugged her curves perfectly, its elegant simplicity reflecting her own understated grace. Her dark skin glowed against the fabric, and her natural hair was styled in an intricate updo that showcased her elegant neck and the subtle strength in her jawline. At 24, Isabella possessed the kind of beauty that didn't need to announce itself. Intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see through pretenses, a warm smile that could light up any room, and a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. She had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard with a degree in literature, spoke 3 languages fluently, and had spent the last 2 years working as a curator at Boston's Museum of Fine Arts. She wasn't naive about the world, but she had never imagined her life would be decided by a handshake between 2 fathers. "Izzy, sweetheart, the car is here." Her mother's voice drifted through the door, gentle but tinged with the weight of family obligation. Isabella took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the antique books on her nightstand. Jane Austen, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, women who had taught her that strength often wore the quietest disguise. She had read about arranged marriages in literature, but living it felt surreal. The ride to the Palmer estate passed in a blur of autumn colors. Boston's historic neighborhoods gave way to the exclusive suburbs of Brookline, where old money lived behind manicured hedges and wrought-iron gates. Isabella watched the scenery change, her mind racing with questions about the man she was about to marry. Sebastian Palmer, 36 years old. She had seen his photograph in business magazines, sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, dark hair always perfectly styled. He looked like he had never smiled genuinely in his life. The articles described him as brilliant, ruthless, and utterly untouchable. A man who had inherited an empire and expanded it beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The Palmer mansion rose before them like something from a different era. Georgian architecture with tall windows and ivy-covered walls. Isabella's stomach tightened as their car pulled into the circular driveway, where another black sedan was already waiting. "He's here," her father said quietly from the front seat, his voice heavy with the weight of agreements made in boardrooms she had never been invited to enter. Inside the grand foyer, Isabella met him for the first time. Sebastian Palmer stood near the fireplace, one hand casually tucked into his tailored charcoal suit pocket. He was taller than she had imagined, at least 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled his jacket perfectly. His dark hair was styled with precision, and when he turned to face her, his blue eyes were as cold as winter morning. He looked at her with the expression of a man examining a painting he hadn't chosen, but was expected to purchase. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low and smooth, extending a hand that felt firm and impersonal when she shook it. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "It was, thank you." Isabella's voice remained steady despite the chill in his tone. She met his gaze directly, refusing to look away first. "Mr. Palmer." Something flickered across his expression, surprise perhaps at her composure. Most people, Isabella had been told, found Sebastian Palmer intimidating, but Isabella had spent years in museums, surrounded by priceless artifacts and demanding collectors. She recognized power when she saw it, and she wasn't easily impressed by it. The ceremony was small, conducted in the Palmer family's private chapel, with only immediate family present. Isabella found herself standing beside a man who felt like a stranger, repeating vows that should have meant everything but somehow felt hollow. When Sebastian slipped the platinum wedding band onto her finger, his touch was gentle but distant. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, his kiss was brief, formal, and completely devoid of warmth. "Well," Sebastian said quietly as their families mingled afterward, "I suppose we should discuss the practical arrangements." Isabella turned to study her new husband. Even in this moment, he looked like he was conducting a business meeting. Practical arrangements? Living situations, expectations, boundaries. His blue eyes remained fixed on something over her shoulder, never quite meeting hers. "I have a penthouse in Back Bay. You're welcome to stay there, of course, though I maintain residences in New York and London as well. You'll have your own wing, naturally." "Naturally," Isabella repeated, a slight edge creeping into her voice. Sebastian finally looked at her directly, and for a moment she caught something vulnerable beneath the ice, a flicker of uncertainty, quickly masked. "I want to be clear about something, Isabella. This marriage it's a business arrangement, nothing more. I won't pretend to feel what I don't, and I won't expect you to pretend either." Isabella felt something twist in her chest, not heartbreak exactly, but a deep disappointment in the coldness of it all. She had entered this arrangement knowing it wasn't love, but she had hoped for at least basic human warmth. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I hope you understand that I intend to make the best of this situation, regardless of your feelings about it." For the first time, Sebastian's expression showed genuine surprise. Most people cowered before his harsh honesty or tried to charm their way around it. Isabella Carter was doing neither. As the reception wound down and they prepared to leave for their first night as husband and wife, Isabella caught Sebastian watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The car ride to his penthouse was silent, the city lights blurring past the windows. Isabella found herself wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and in the seat beside her, Sebastian Palmer stared out at the Boston skyline, trying to ignore the way his new wife's quiet dignity had unsettled every assumption he'd made about her. Neither of them knew that by morning, everything would change. The elevator climbed silently to the 40th floor, and Isabella wondered if this was what ascending to heaven felt like: beautiful, inevitable, and terrifying. Sebastian's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of one of Boston's most exclusive buildings. When the doors opened directly into his foyer, Isabella stepped into a world that looked like it had been photographed for Architectural Digest. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Boston harbor, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars against the dark water. Everything was pristine, expensive, and utterly impersonal. Black leather furniture, glass tables, abstract art that probably cost more than most people's homes. It was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful, meant to be admired from a distance, never truly lived in. "Impressive," Isabella said, setting down her overnight bag. She had packed light, knowing her belongings from her family home would be delivered tomorrow. Sebastian loosened his tie, the first crack in his perfect facade she'd witnessed all day. "The housekeeper, Cordelia, comes twice a week. She'll stock whatever you prefer in the kitchen." He gestured toward a hallway lined with modern art. "Your suite is that way. You'll have complete privacy." Isabella turned to face him fully. In the soft lighting of his living room, Sebastian looked less like the untouchable businessman and more like a man. There were fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation indicated, and his dark hair had fallen slightly out of place. "Sebastian," she said, his name feeling strange on her tongue. "Can I ask you something?" He paused in the act of removing his cufflinks, those blue eyes meeting hers with wariness. "Of course. Why did you agree to this? The marriage, I mean. You clearly don't need my family's connections or money." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. He moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring himself 2 fingers of what looked like very expensive scotch. He didn't offer her one. "Sometimes we agree to things for reasons that have nothing to do with what we need," he said finally, taking a sip. "And sometimes we discover that what we thought we understood about ourselves was completely wrong." It wasn't really an answer, but Isabella sensed it was all she would get tonight. "Well then," she said, smoothing down her dress, "I suppose I should see my new accommodations." "Isabella." Her name stopped her at the hallway entrance. When she turned, Sebastian was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "I want you to know, I don't expect anything from you tonight, or any night for that matter. This arrangement doesn't require physical obligations." Heat crept up Isabella's neck, but she kept her voice steady. "That's very considerate of you." "I'm not a monster," he said quietly. "I never thought you were." Isabella studied his face, noting the way his jaw tightened at her words. Distant, perhaps. Guarded, but not a monster. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. A crack in the ice, barely perceptible, but there. "You might be the first person to see the difference." Isabella's suite was as luxurious as she'd expected. A king-sized bed with silk sheets, a sitting area with its own fireplace, and a bathroom that could have housed her entire childhood bedroom. But it was also impersonal, like a 5-star hotel room waiting for a guest who might never come. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her wedding dress, and called her best friend Aurelia. "Mrs. Palmer." Aurelia's voice was a welcome burst of warmth. "How does it feel to be married to Boston's most eligible iceberg?" Isabella laughed despite herself. He's not what I expected. Better or worse? Different. Isabella kicked off her heels, wiggling her toes against the plush carpet. He's cold, yes, but there's something else there. Something he's protecting. Honey, you cannot fix this man. I'm not trying to fix him, Leah. I'm just trying to understand him. After they hung up, Isabella changed into a silk nightgown, navy blue, elegant but modest, and wandered back to the living room for a glass of water. The penthouse was dark except for the city lights streaming through the windows, but she could see Sebastian's silhouette on the balcony. He had changed too, trading his suit for dark jeans and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up. A tumbler of scotch sat on the railing beside him, and he was staring out at the harbour with the intensity of a man trying to solve the world's problems. Isabella debated returning to her room, but something about his posture, the slight slump of his shoulders, the way his head was tilted as if carrying an invisible weight, made her step outside instead. The October air was crisp against her skin, carrying the scent of salt and autumn leaves. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. Sebastian turned, and in the moonlight she could see surprise flicker across his features. "I don't sleep much in general. Guilty conscience or overactive mind?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Both, probably." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city sprawling below them like a living constellation. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself against the cool air. "Here." Sebastian shrugged out of his shirt and held it out to her. "I'm fine. Take it, Isabella. You'll catch cold." The shirt was warm from his body and smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely him. Isabella slipped it on, the fabric hanging loose around her frame. "Thank you. You're welcome." Sebastian's voice was softer than she'd heard it all day. "Isabella?" "Yes? I owe you an apology." She turned to look at him, surprised. "For what?" "For the way I spoke to you today, about expectations and boundaries." He ran a hand through his dark hair, messing it further. "This situation isn't your fault any more than it's mine, and you didn't deserve to be treated like a business transaction." "But that's what this is, isn't it? A business transaction." Sebastian was quiet for so long, Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to think so, but sitting here tonight, watching you handle everything with such grace, I'm not sure anymore." Isabella felt her heart skip, but before she could respond, Sebastian was already turning toward the door. "Good night, Isabella." "Good night, Sebastian." Alone on the balcony, wrapped in her husband's shirt, and surrounded by the lights of a city that suddenly felt full of possibilities, Isabella realized that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement might become something neither of them had bargained for. But first, she had to figure out what secret Sebastian Palmer was hiding behind those beautiful guarded eyes. The smell of coffee woke her. Isabella opened her eyes to find golden morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new bedroom. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the events of yesterday came flooding back. The wedding, the penthouse, Sebastian's shirt, which she was still wearing. She padded barefoot to the kitchen, following the rich aroma of what smelled like the most expensive coffee beans money could buy. Sebastian stood at the marble counter, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His hair was perfectly styled again, every trace of last night's vulnerability erased, except for the way he looked at her when she entered the room. "Good morning," Isabella said, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance, messy curls escaping from her silk head wrap, his oversized shirt hanging to her knees, bare legs and feet. "Good morning." Sebastian's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. "I made coffee, Colombian single origin." "Of course you did." Isabella couldn't help smiling. "Let me guess, you have the beans flown in directly from the plantation?" "Something like that." Was that almost a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth? "There's cream in the refrigerator, sugar in the cabinet above." "Black is fine." Isabella accepted the mug he offered, their fingers brushing briefly. The coffee was extraordinary, smooth, rich with notes of chocolate and caramel. "Wow. Good? Incredible. Thank you." She leaned against the counter, studying him over the rim of her mug. "Do you always dress like you're about to acquire a small country before 8 a.m.? This time Sebastian did smile, just a flash, but real. "I have a conference call with London in 20 minutes, then meetings until 6. "Every day?" "Most days." Isabella nodded slowly. "And what am I supposed to do while you're busy conquering the business world?" The question seemed to catch Sebastian off guard. He set down his mug, his expression growing serious. Whatever you want, Isabella. This is your home now. You can redecorate, invite friends over, continue your work at the museum. Actually, I resigned yesterday morning. You what? Sebastian's composure cracked completely. Why would you do that? Isabella shrugged, taking another sip of coffee. It didn't seem fair to keep a position I might not be able to fully commit to, depending on how this all works out. Isabella. Sebastian moved closer, and she caught a hint of his cologne, cedar and bergamot, sophisticated and warm. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your career for this arrangement. Who says I'm sacrificing anything? Isabella met his eyes steadily. Maybe I'm just making room for new possibilities. Before Sebastian could respond, his phone buzzed against the marble counter. He glanced at it, and Isabella saw his jaw tighten. London, he said, his voice already shifting back into business mode. Go, Isabella said gently. Conquer whatever needs conquering. Sebastian hesitated at the kitchen threshold. Will you be here when I get back? The question was casual, but Isabella heard the uncertainty beneath it. Where else would I go? This is my home now, remember? Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. Right. Of course. After he left, Isabella explored the penthouse properly. The guest bedrooms were beautiful, but sterile. The home office was all dark wood and leather, masculine, intimidating, and utterly Sebastian, but it was the library that made her stop breathing. 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with first editions, classics, contemporary fiction, poetry collections, a reading chair by the window that looked like it had actually been used. This room felt lived in, loved, human. Isabella ran her fingers along the spines. Dickens, Morrison, Neruda, Fitzgerald. Hidden among the serious literature, she found a worn copy of The Princess Bride and nearly laughed out loud. Mrs. Palmer? A warm voice made her turn. The woman in the doorway was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself with quiet dignity. I'm Cordelia Thorne, the housekeeper. I hope I didn't startle you. Not at all. Please, call me Isabella. Cordelia smiled. Mr. Palmer mentioned you might be redecorating. I've worked for this family for 15 years, and I have to say, this place could use a woman's touch. What was it like before? Before what, dear? Before Sebastian lived here alone? Did he always live alone? Cordelia's expression grew thoughtful. There was someone years ago, before I started working here, but Mr. Palmer doesn't talk about the past much. Isabella nodded, filing this information away. Cordelia, can I ask you something? Of course. What's he really like? Sebastian, I mean, when he's not in CEO mode. Cordelia was quiet for a moment, dusting a bookshelf that didn't need dusting. He's lonely, dear. Lonelier than anyone should be. But he's also kind in ways people don't see. He paid for my grandson's surgery last year, never mentioned it to anyone. He remembers the names of every employee's children. She paused. He just forgets how to let people close. Why? That's not my story to tell, I'm afraid. But Isabella, Cordelia turned to face her fully. You're different from what I expected. Different how? Stronger. He needs someone strong. That afternoon, Isabella walked through Boston Common, thinking about Cordelia's words. She found herself at a small bookstore tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing boutique. The owner, a woman about her age with intricate braids and a warm smile, looked up from her inventory. Can I help you find anything? Just browsing. Isabella paused at a display of local authors. Actually, I'm curious. Do you ever host events here? Readings, book clubs? All the time. Are you a writer? No, but I used to curate literary exhibits. I was thinking about maybe starting a book discussion group. Something focused on diverse voices, contemporary fiction. That sounds amazing. I'm Indira, by the way. Isabella. They talked for an hour about books, about community, about the power of stories to bring people together. When Isabella finally left with a bag full of carefully chosen novels, she felt lighter than she had in months. That evening, she was curled in Sebastian's reading chair with one of her new books when she heard his key in the door. The sound of his footsteps stopped at the library doorway. Hi, she said, without looking up. Hi. Sebastian's voice was tired. How was your day? Productive. I met Cordelia. She's lovely. And I found a bookstore that might let me start a discussion group. Isabella finally looked up to find Sebastian leaning against the doorframe, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted. How was London? Complicated. Sebastian's eyes moved around the library, his sanctuary, now shared. You don't have to ask about my work, Isabella. Most people find it boring. Most people haven't married you. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than Isabella had intended. Sebastian's expression was unreadable. I should let you read, he said finally. Sebastian, he stopped. Would you like some dinner? I was thinking about cooking something simple. You cook? Isabella laughed. I'm not completely helpless, despite what my current employment status might suggest. For a long moment, Sebastian just looked at her, sitting in his chair in his library, surrounded by the books he loved, offering to cook him dinner. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. I would like that very much. And as they moved toward the kitchen together, Isabella realized that maybe the key to understanding Sebastian Palmer wasn't in unlocking his secrets. It was in creating new ones together. So you don't actually know how to cook, do you? Isabella stood in Sebastian's pristine kitchen, staring at ingredients that looked like they'd been arranged for a photo shoot rather than actual meal preparation. Everything was perfectly organized and utterly unused, like a display kitchen in a furniture showroom. Sebastian had the grace to look sheepish. I have restaurants on speed dial. Of course you do. Isabella opened the refrigerator, which contained sparkling water, leftover takeout containers, and what appeared to be very expensive cheese that had never been touched. Sebastian, when was the last time you ate a home-cooked meal? He was quiet for so long that Isabella turned to look at him. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, but still looked like he was afraid to touch anything in his own kitchen. I honestly can't remember, he said finally. Something in his voice, not sadness exactly, but a kind of resigned emptiness, made Isabella's heart clench. Well then, tonight we're going to fix that. I should warn you, I'm useless in the kitchen. I once managed to burn water. Isabella laughed. That's actually impressive. How do you burn water? I got distracted on a conference call and forgot I was boiling it. The pot was ruined. Sebastian ran a hand through his hair. Cordelia wasn't pleased. Poor Cordelia. Isabella began pulling items from the pantry. Pasta, olive oil, garlic, herbs that looked like they'd never been opened. Tonight's lesson, basic pasta with garlic and herbs. Even you can't burn this. Don't underestimate me. The first challenge was getting Sebastian to relax. He approached cooking like he approached business, with intense focus and the assumption that there must be a complex strategy involved. It's just garlic, Sebastian. You're not performing surgery. I don't want to mess it up. Isabella moved to stand beside him at the cutting board, close enough to smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. Here, like this. She covered his hands with hers, guiding the knife. His hands were larger than hers, strong and steady, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders. See? Gentle pressure. Rock the blade. His hands relaxed under hers, and she felt him lean slightly into her touch. There you go. When she stepped back, Sebastian continued mincing the garlic, his movements more confident. This is oddly meditative. Cooking is therapy for the soul. My grandmother used to say that you can't make good food with angry hands. Your grandmother sounds wise. She was. She's the one who taught me to cook, actually. Every Sunday after church, we'd spend hours in her kitchen. Isabella started heating olive oil in a pan, the scent filling the kitchen. She said food was love, made visible. Sebastian had gone still beside her. That's beautiful. What about your grandparents? Did they cook? I wouldn't know. Sebastian's voice had gone flat. I didn't really have that kind of childhood. Isabella glanced at him, noting the way his jaw had tightened. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. You weren't prying, it's just different families, different experiences. Sebastian added the garlic to the hot oil, and the kitchen filled with the most wonderful smell. This actually smells good. Don't sound so surprised. Isabella bumped his shoulder with hers, relieved when he smiled. Now we add the herbs, not too much. You want to taste the pasta, not drown it. They worked side by side, and Isabella found herself stealing glances at Sebastian as he concentrated on stirring the sauce. There was something endearing about seeing him so focused on something so simple. His usual commanding presence had softened into something more human, more real. Isabella, he said suddenly, can I ask you something? Of course. Why aren't you angry? The question caught her off guard. About what? This. The marriage, the arrangement, having your life decided for you. Sebastian turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious. Most people would be furious. Isabella considered the question while she tested the pasta. I suppose I could be, but anger takes a lot of energy, and I'd rather spend that energy figuring out how to make the best of this situation. Even if it means being married to someone who doesn't... Sebastian trailed off. Who doesn't what? Someone who doesn't deserve your grace. The vulnerability in his voice made Isabella's breath catch. She turned off the burner and faced him completely. Sebastian, what makes you think you don't deserve grace? Because I don't. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was stating the weather. I'm not a good man, Isabella. I'm cold, I'm selfish. I put business above everything else. I've hurt people. Stop. Isabella reached up and placed her hand against his cheek, surprised by her own boldness. Sebastian froze under her touch. You made me coffee this morning without being asked. You gave me your shirt when I was cold. You apologized for something that wasn't really your fault. Those aren't the actions of a bad man. Sebastian's eyes closed briefly, like her touch caused him physical pain. You don't know everything about me. I don't need to know everything. I know enough. For a moment, they stood there in the warm kitchen, her hand on his face, his eyes searching hers for something she wasn't sure she could give him. Then Sebastian stepped back, breaking the contact. The pasta's getting cold, he said, his voice rough. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Sebastian asked thoughtful questions about her work at the museum, her time at Harvard, her family. In return, Isabella learned that he spoke 4 languages, had never seen The Princess Bride, despite owning it, and had a secret love for terrible reality TV shows. You watch The Bachelor? Isabella nearly choked on her wine. I find the psychology fascinating. People making major life decisions based on manufactured romance. Sebastian's mouth quirked. Though I suppose I'm not one to judge given my current circumstances. Our current circumstances, Isabella corrected. We're in this together, remember? Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. Are we? Together, I mean? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and uncertainty. Isabella set down her wineglass, her heart beating faster. I'd like to think so, if you want to be. Sebastian was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. I haven't been together with anyone in a very long time, Isabella. I'm not sure I remember how. Then maybe we can figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations. Just see what happens. When Sebastian looked up, his eyes held something she hadn't seen before. Hope, tentative and fragile, but real. I'd like that, he said quietly. Later, as they cleaned up together, Sebastian proving surprisingly competent at washing dishes, Isabella found herself thinking about the man behind the cold facade. There were layers to Sebastian Palmer, depths she was only beginning to glimpse. Isabella? Sebastian's voice was soft in the dim kitchen. Yes, thank you. For tonight. For the cooking lesson. For, he gestured helplessly, for being patient with me. You don't have to thank me for basic human kindness, Sebastian. In my world, kindness is rarely basic. Isabella dried her hands and turned to face him fully. Well then, maybe it's time you found a new world. And as Sebastian looked at her in the soft kitchen light, still wearing his expensive suit, but with sauce stains on his sleeves and his hair slightly mussed, Isabella realized that maybe she was already helping him build one. The doorbell rang at precisely 10:15 a.m., followed immediately by enthusiastic knocking. Isabella looked up from her book to find Sebastian frozen at his laptop, a look of genuine panic crossing his features. Sebastian Palmer, I know you're in there. Open this door before I call building security and tell them you're having a medical emergency. The voice was young, female, and decidedly amused rather than threatening. Sebastian's panic shifted into something that looked almost like fondness. Who is that? Isabella asked, closing her book. My sister. Sebastian rubbed his face with both hands. Damn it, I forgot she was coming to town. Your sister? Isabella felt a flutter of nerves. You didn't mention you had a sister. I don't mention a lot of things. Sebastian was already moving toward the door. Fair warning, temperance is a lot. The woman who bounded through the door the moment Sebastian opened it was nothing like what Isabella had expected. Where Sebastian was all sharp lines and controlled elegance, this woman was pure energy and warmth. She had Sebastian's dark hair, but wore it in a messy bun, secured with what appeared to be a pencil. Her clothes were casual, worn jeans, vintage band t-shirt and sneakers that had seen better days. She was pretty in an effortless, natural way that made Isabella immediately like her. Bastian! She launched herself at Sebastian, who caught her in what was clearly a well-practiced hug. I missed you, you antisocial hermit. I missed you too, Tempe. Sebastian's voice was softer than Isabella had ever heard it, and when his sister pulled back, Isabella could see genuine affection in his eyes. What are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming until next month. Change of plans. The gallery moved up my exhibition, so I had to fly in early to oversee the installation. Temperance's eyes suddenly found Isabella, and her face broke into a delighted grin. And you must be the mysterious wife I've been hearing absolutely nothing about. Isabella, Sebastian said, his voice taking on a careful tone. This is my sister, Temperance. Tempe. Isabella. Temperance bounded over, and, before Isabella could react, pulled her into a warm hug that smelled like paint and vanilla perfume. Oh my God, you're gorgeous, and you have excellent taste in books. She gestured to the novel in Isabella's hands. I love that author. Thank you. Isabella managed, charmed despite her nerves. It's wonderful to meet you. Tempe, Sebastian said, his voice carrying a warning. We should probably talk about how you got married without inviting your only sister to the wedding. Temperance spun around to face Sebastian, hands on her hips. Seriously, Bastian, I had to find out from Mom's assistant. Mom's assistant. Do you know how humiliating that was? Isabella felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Your mother doesn't know about the wedding? Sebastian's jaw tightened. It's complicated. Complicated? Temperance laughed, but there was an edge to it. He means our mother is probably planning your funeral as we speak. She had very specific ideas about who Sebastian would marry. Temperance. Sebastian's voice was sharp now. That's enough. What? It's true, though honestly, I'm glad you didn't listen to her for once. Temperance turned back to Isabella with a conspiratorial grin. Our mother has been trying to marry Sebastian off to suitable society daughters for years. The fact that he chose someone for himself, well, sort of chose, is actually progress. Sort of chose? Isabella repeated, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather outside. The siblings exchanged a look that Isabella couldn't interpret, but she saw Sebastian's shoulders tense. I should make coffee, Sebastian said quickly. Tempe, how long are you in town? 2 weeks. And don't think you can distract me with caffeine. Temperance flopped onto the couch like she owned the place. Isabella, please tell me you know what you've gotten yourself into with this family. I'm beginning to think I don't, Isabella said honestly, settling into the chair across from her. Oh boy. Temperance's expression grew serious. Sebastian, what exactly did you tell her about the arrangement? Temperance, I'm warning you. What arrangement? Isabella's voice was quiet, but both siblings turned to look at her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Temperance spoke. Isabella, how much do you know about why Sebastian agreed to this marriage? The families had business connections, Isabella said slowly. It made sense for both sides. Temperance looked at Sebastian with something that might have been disappointment. That's all you told her? Really? Tempe, please. Sebastian. Isabella's voice cut through their sibling tension. What is she talking about? Sebastian sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. There are things about my family, about our business, that I haven't explained. What things? Our grandfather's will, Temperance said, when Sebastian remained silent. Tell her, Bastian. She deserves to know. Know what? Isabella felt her heart beginning to race. Sebastian looked up at her and Isabella saw guilt and shame warring in his expression. My grandfather left everything. The business, the properties, the trust funds, with conditions. One of them was that I had to be married by my 37th birthday. Isabella felt the room spin slightly. Your 37th birthday, when is that? Next month. The words hit her like a physical blow. Next month? Isabella, I wanted to tell you, you married me because of a will. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. This whole thing, everything you said about family arrangements and business connections, it was about your inheritance. It's not that simple, isn't it? Isabella stood up, her hands shaking. Your grandfather basically forced you to find a wife, and I was… what? Convenient? No. Sebastian was on his feet too, reaching for her. Isabella, that's not how it happened. Then how did it happen, Sebastian? Because right now it looks like I was the solution to your legal problem. Temperance cleared her throat. If it helps, he could have married anyone. The will didn't specify who, just that he had to be married. He chose your family specifically. That doesn't help at all, Isabella said, backing away from both of them. It makes it worse. Why? Sebastian's voice was rough with desperation. Why does it make it worse? Because it means none of this is real. Isabella's composure finally cracked. The coffee, the cooking lessons, the conversations, all of it was just you playing house until you could secure your money. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me honestly, Sebastian, if there was no will, no inheritance deadline, would you have married me? The question hung in the air between them. Sebastian's mouth opened, then closed, and Isabella saw the answer in his silence. Right. Isabella moved toward the hallway. I need some air. Isabella, wait. But she was already grabbing her jacket and heading for the elevator, leaving Sebastian standing in his perfect penthouse with his sister and the weight of truths he should have told days ago. As the elevator doors closed, Isabella heard Temperance's voice, disappointed and sad. Bastian, you really screwed this up. And for the first time since their wedding night, Isabella wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Isabella found herself in the one place that had always made sense, surrounded by books. The small bookstore where she'd met Indira felt like a sanctuary after the cold perfection of Sebastian's penthouse. She sat in the reading corner, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in her hands, staring at the same page she'd been trying to read for the past hour. You look like someone who just discovered her favorite author plagiarized everything, Indira said gently, settling into the chair across from her. Isabella looked up, managing a weak smile. Something like that. Want to talk about it? I'm a good listener, and Saturday afternoons are slow anyway. For a moment, Isabella considered deflecting, maintaining the privacy she'd been taught was essential when it came to family matters. But the weight of the morning's revelations felt too heavy to carry alone. How well do you really know someone you've been married to for less than a week? Isabella asked. Indira's eyebrows rose. Ah, husband troubles already. I just found out that our entire marriage is based on something he didn't tell me, something pretty significant. Like what? Isabella hesitated, then realized she needed to voice it to someone who wasn't family, wasn't involved, wasn't invested in maintaining appearances. Like the fact that he needed to be married by next month to inherit his grandfather's estate, and apparently I was convenient. Indira winced. Ouch! That's a big omission, right? I keep thinking about all our conversations, all the moments I thought were genuine, and wondering if he was just performing, playing the part of a husband figuring out how to care about someone. Can I ask you something? Indira leaned forward. In those moments you thought were genuine, how did they feel? Not how you think about them now, but how did they feel when they were happening? Isabella closed her eyes, remembering Sebastian's hands under hers as she taught him to chop garlic, the way he'd looked at her when she'd touched his face, the softness in his voice when he'd thanked her for being patient with him. Real, she whispered. They felt real. So maybe they were. But if the whole foundation is a lie, is it though? Indira's voice was gentle but challenging. I mean, he could have married anyone, right? If it was just about the inheritance. Isabella had been trying not to think about that particular detail. His sister said the same thing. Smart sister. Look, I don't know your husband, but I do know that desperate people make quick decisions. That doesn't mean those decisions can't turn into something meaningful. Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed with a text, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Sebastian, please come home so we can talk. Sebastian, I know I should have told you about the will. I was wrong. Sebastian, Temperance is making me inventory all the ways I've screwed this up. The list is getting long. Sebastian, I'm not good with words, Isabella, but I need you to know that whatever started this, what I feel now is real. Sebastian, please don't give up on us yet. Isabella stared at the messages, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. He's texting, isn't he? Indira observed with amusement. How did you know? You got the same look my sister gets when her boyfriend is groveling. That mix of annoyance and reluctant affection. Isabella laughed despite herself. Is it that obvious? Honey, you've been married less than a week and you're sitting in a bookstore working through your feelings instead of packing your bags and going home to your parents. That tells me something. What does it tell you? That whatever else is true, you don't want this to be over. An hour later, Isabella stood outside Sebastian's building, her keycard feeling heavier than it should. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt endless, giving her too much time to think about what she wanted to say, what she needed to hear, what she could forgive. The penthouse was quiet when she entered, but she could hear low voices from the kitchen. She followed the sound to find Sebastian and Temperance sitting at the island, a half-empty bottle of wine between them. Oh good, you're back, Temperance said, looking relieved. I was starting to think I'd have to stage an intervention. Tempe, maybe give us some space. Sebastian's voice was rough, like he'd been talking for hours. Actually, Isabella said, surprising herself, I'd like her to stay, if that's okay with you, Temperance. Of course. Though fair warning, Sebastian's been beating himself up pretty thoroughly. I'm running out of ways to tell him he's an idiot. Sebastian looked up at Isabella, and she was struck by how exhausted he appeared. His hair was mussed from running his hands through it. His shirt was wrinkled and there were shadows under his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have told you about the will from the beginning." "Yes, you should have." Isabella took the stool across from him. "But I want to understand why you didn't." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, turning his wineglass in his hands. "Because I was ashamed." "Of what?" "Of the fact that I'm 36 years old and my dead grandfather is still controlling my life. Of the fact that I was desperate enough to agree to an arranged marriage to keep my company." He looked up at her. "Of the fact that I needed help and couldn't figure out how to ask for it like a normal person." Isabella felt some of her anger soften. "Sebastian, but mostly," he continued, "I was ashamed because I knew that if I told you the truth, you'd look at me the way you're looking at me right now, like I'm someone who uses people. Is that what you did? Use me?" Sebastian's silence stretched long enough that Isabella felt her heart sink. "At first," he said finally, so quietly she almost missed it. "At first, yes. I chose your family because your father had something I needed, and marrying you solved my problem. It was selfish and calculating and everything you probably think it was." Isabella nodded, grateful for his honesty even as it hurt. "But, Isabella," Sebastian continued, meeting her eyes, "what I didn't expect was you. I didn't expect someone who would teach me to cook and ask thoughtful questions and make me laugh at reality TV shows. I didn't expect to look forward to coming home because you were here. I didn't expect to care about whether you were happy. And now? Now I wake up thinking about how to make your coffee the way you like it. Now I find myself buying books I think you'd enjoy. Now I realize that losing you would hurt in ways that have nothing to do with inheritance or business arrangements." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "How do I know that's real? How do I know you're not just saying what I need to hear?" It was Temperance who answered. "Because, honey, if you knew my brother like I do, you'd know that Sebastian Palmer doesn't do feelings. He doesn't do vulnerability. He sure as hell doesn't sit in his kitchen drinking wine and analyzing his emotions." She gestured at Sebastian. This is not normal Sebastian behavior." "She's right," Sebastian said. "I don't know how to do this, Isabella. I don't know how to separate what started as obligation from what's becoming something else, but I know I don't want you to leave." Isabella looked at both of them, Sebastian with his guarded hope, Temperance with her encouraging smile, and realized that Indira had been right. She didn't want this to be over either. "I don't want to leave," she said finally. "But Sebastian, if we're going to figure this out, it has to be honest from here on out. No more omissions, no more protecting me from difficult truths." "Agreed. And I want to know about your family. The real story, not just the parts you think I can handle." Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Agreed. And," Isabella added, surprising herself with her own boldness, "I want us to figure out what this is without the deadline pressure. I want to know that whatever we build together isn't just about satisfying your grandfather's will." "What are you suggesting?" Isabella took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting we take the inheritance out of the equation. Make your own choice, free from your grandfather's manipulation." "Isabella," Sebastian said carefully, "that's a lot of money, and the business will survive without your grandfather's conditions or it won't. But whatever we decide about us should be about us, not about what he wanted." Sebastian stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella saw the exact moment he understood what she was offering him. The chance to choose her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "You're asking me to risk everything," he said. "I'm asking you to risk everything for the right reasons." And as Sebastian reached across the island to take her hand, his fingers warm and steady against hers, Isabella realized that maybe the foundation of their marriage wasn't as broken as she'd thought. Maybe it was just waiting for them to build something real on top of it. 3 days after their conversation in the kitchen, Isabella woke to find Sebastian already dressed in a charcoal suit, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was tense, clipped, the businessman mask firmly back in place. "No, Mother, I don't think that's necessary. Yes, she's here. No, I won't ask her to leave." Isabella felt her stomach tighten. She had been dreading this moment since Temperance's visit, but she knew it was inevitable. Sebastian ended the call and turned to find her watching from the doorway. "Your mother?" she asked. "She's in town. She wants to meet you." Sebastian's voice was carefully neutral, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders. "Lunch today, if you're willing." "Do I have a choice?" "You always have a choice, Isabella, but—" Sebastian hesitated. "She's not going to go away until she meets you, and she's intense." "Intense how?" Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, disturbing his perfect styling. My mother has very strong opinions about family, duty, and what constitutes appropriate behavior. She's not happy about the marriage. Because it was rushed? Because you weren't her choice. The words hung between them, honest and painful. Isabella appreciated that Sebastian wasn't trying to sugarcoat the situation, but it didn't make the prospect of lunch any more appealing. What was her choice? Someone from our circle, someone predictable. Sebastian moved closer, his blue eyes serious. Isabella, whatever she says today, remember that her approval doesn't change anything between us. It can't. 2 hours later, Isabella stood in the mirror, adjusting the navy blue dress she'd chosen carefully. Elegant but not trying too hard, expensive but not flashy, professional enough to show she wasn't intimidated, feminine enough to show she wasn't trying to compete. "Do you look perfect?" Sebastian said from behind her, and when she met his eyes in the mirror, she saw something that looked like pride. "I look terrified." "That too. But you also look strong. She'll respect that." The restaurant Sebastian's mother had chosen was exactly what Isabella had expected. Old Boston elegance, the kind of place where reservations were passed down through generations, and the waitstaff had been there since the Carter administration. Constance Palmer sat at a corner table, and Isabella could immediately see where Sebastian had gotten his commanding presence. She was a striking woman in her early 60s, with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon and wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Isabella's entire wardrobe. Her posture was impeccable, her jewelry understated, but clearly expensive, and when she looked up as they approached, her smile was polite and completely cold. "Sebastian," she offered her cheek for a kiss, which Sebastian dutifully provided. "And you must be Isabella." "Mrs. Palmer." Isabella extended her hand, which Constance shook briefly with the kind of grip that assessed and dismissed simultaneously. "Please, sit." Constance's voice was cultured, with the kind of Boston accent that spoke of generations of privilege. "I took the liberty of ordering for the table. I hope you don't mind." Isabella minded, actually, but she recognized a power play when she saw one. "Of course not." "So," Constance said once they were seated, "Isabella, tell me about your family." For the next 20 minutes, Isabella found herself subjected to what felt like a job interview conducted by someone who had already decided not to hire her. Constance's questions were polite but probing, about her education, her work, her family's background, her plans for the future. Each answer was met with a nod that somehow managed to be both acknowledging and dismissive. Sebastian sat beside Isabella, his jaw growing tighter with each exchange. "And what are your thoughts on children?" Constance asked, cutting delicately into her salmon. "Mother," Sebastian's voice carried a warning. "It's a reasonable question, Sebastian. The Palmer family line doesn't continue itself." Isabella felt heat creep up her neck, but kept her voice steady. "I think children should be wanted and loved, not conceived to meet family expectations." Constance's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "How modern of you." "How human of me," Isabella replied evenly. Something shifted in Constance's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. For a moment, the two women simply looked at each other across the white tablecloth. "You know," Constance said finally, "I had lunch with the Ashworth girl last week, Genevieve. She mentioned that she and Sebastian had reconnected recently." Isabella felt Sebastian go very still beside her. "Did she?" "Yes. She seemed to think there might be hope for a reconciliation. Of course, that was before she knew about your arrangement." "It's not an arrangement," Sebastian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's a marriage." "Is it?" Constance's smile was sharp. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks very much like a business transaction designed to satisfy your grandfather's outdated requirements." The words hit exactly where Constance intended them to, and Isabella felt something cold settle in her chest. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that everyone would see their marriage as nothing more than a convenient solution to Sebastian's inheritance problem. "You're right," Isabella said quietly, surprising both Sebastian and his mother. "It did start as a business transaction." Constance looked triumphant. Sebastian looked stricken. "But," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger, "what something starts as isn't necessarily what it becomes. Your son and I may have married for practical reasons, but we're choosing to stay married for personal ones." "And what personal reasons are those?" Constance's tone was skeptical. Isabella looked at Sebastian, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Because he makes me laugh. Because he listens when I talk. Because he's teaching me that strength and gentleness aren't mutually exclusive." She turned back to Constance. Because when I look at him, I see possibility. How romantic, Constance said dryly. And Sebastian, what do you see when you look at your wife? Sebastian was quiet for so long that Isabella began to worry he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. I see someone who challenges me to be better than I thought I could be. Someone who saw past the reputation and the money and the walls I've built and decided I was worth her patience anyway. He reached for Isabella's hand under the table. I see the first person who ever made me want to try to deserve their love. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Constance set down her fork, her expression unreadable. Well, she said finally, that's certainly not what I expected to hear. What did you expect to hear? Sebastian asked. That this was temporary, that you'd both come to your senses and end this charade before it went too far. Constance dabbed her lips with her napkin. Your grandfather's will was manipulation, Sebastian. Pure and simple. I hoped you'd be smart enough to see that. I do see that, Sebastian said. That's why Isabella and I have decided to take the inheritance out of the equation entirely. Constance's perfectly composed expression cracked. What do you mean? I mean we're not going to let a dead man's conditions dictate our choices. Whatever we build together, it's going to be ours. Sebastian, that's millions of dollars. That aren't worth more than my integrity. Isabella felt a surge of pride at the quiet conviction in Sebastian's voice. This was the man she was beginning to fall in love with, not the cold businessman or the dutiful son, but the person underneath who was finally learning to make his own choices. Constance stared at her son for a long moment, and Isabella saw something like respect flicker across her features. You know, she said slowly, your grandfather would probably approve. He always said the money was just a test. A test of what? Isabella asked. Whether Sebastian would choose obligation or happiness, whether he'd learned the difference between being controlled and being committed. Constance looked directly at Isabella. It appears he has. As they left the restaurant, Constance pulled Isabella aside while Sebastian retrieved their coats. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I came here prepared to dislike you. I know. You handled yourself well. Better than I did. Constance hesitated. My son has been alone for a long time, Isabella. By choice mostly, but alone nonetheless. If you can help him remember how to let people in. I can't change him, Mrs. Palmer, and I wouldn't want to. I can only love who he is and hope that's enough. Constance studied Isabella's face for a moment, then nodded slowly. I think it might be more than enough. I think it might be exactly what he needs. Later, as they walked through Boston Common in the crisp October air, Sebastian was unusually quiet. You okay? Isabella asked, slipping her hand into his. My mother likes you. Is that good or bad? I honestly don't know. It's never happened before. Isabella laughed, bumping his shoulder with hers. Well, I like her too. She's terrifying, but I respect that she was trying to protect you. Even though she was horrible to you, she wasn't horrible. She was thorough. There's a difference. Sebastian stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. How do you do that? Do what? Find the good in everything, even in my mother's interrogation techniques. Isabella smiled, covering his hands with hers. Maybe because I've learned that the best things in life usually come disguised as something else entirely. And as Sebastian leaned down to kiss her, soft, gentle, and full of promise, Isabella realized that she was absolutely right. I can't believe I let you talk me into this. Isabella stood in front of her closet, staring at the emerald green silk dress Temperance had insisted she buy for tonight's gallery opening. It was beautiful, elegant, sophisticated, and completely outside her comfort zone. You look incredible, Sebastian said from the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been designed specifically for his body, which it probably had. Temperance is going to be thrilled. I've never been to a gallery opening before, Isabella admitted, smoothing the dress over her hips. What if I say something stupid about art? Sebastian moved behind her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. Then you'll say something stupid about art. It happens to everyone. Even you? Especially me. I once told a very famous artist that his sculpture looked like abstract plumbing. Isabella laughed despite her nerves. What did he say? That I had excellent instincts and the piece was actually inspired by the water systems of ancient Rome. Sebastian's smile was rueful. Art people are very forgiving if they think you're genuinely interested. The gallery was in the South End, housed in a converted warehouse with soaring ceilings and exposed brick walls. When they arrived, the space was already filled with Boston's cultural elite. Women in designer dresses that cost more than most people's cars, men in expensive suits discussing market trends and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Isabella felt underdressed until she caught sight of Temperance across the room, wearing paint-splattered combat boots, with her black cocktail dress, and looking absolutely radiant. "There's my favorite sister-in-law!" Temperance bounded over, pulling Isabella into a warm hug. "You look gorgeous. And Sebastian, you look like you might actually smile tonight. I'm impressed." "Don't get used to it," Sebastian replied, but his tone was fond. "Come on, I want to show Isabella my work before the critics start dissecting everything." Temperance's paintings were extraordinary, large canvases filled with color and movement, abstract but somehow emotional, like visual representations of feelings too complex for words. Isabella found herself drawn to one in particular, swirls of deep blue and gold that seemed to shift and dance in the gallery lighting. "What do you think?" Temperance asked, appearing beside her. "It's beautiful. It makes me think of—" Isabella paused, searching for words. "Like watching a storm over the ocean at sunset. Dangerous, but breathtaking." Temperance's face lit up. "That's exactly what I was going for. Sebastian, I like her. A lot." "I'm glad," Sebastian said quietly, and Isabella felt the weight of his gaze on her. As the evening progressed, Isabella found herself surprisingly comfortable. The art crowd was pretentious, yes, but also passionate and genuine in their love for creativity. She listened to debates about color theory and artistic intention, slowly beginning to contribute her own observations. "You're a natural at this," said a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, who had introduced herself as Lydia Blackstone, one of Boston's most respected art dealers. "Have you considered working in galleries?" "Actually, I used to curate literary exhibitions at the Museum of Fine Arts." "Used to?" Isabella felt Sebastian's attention sharpen beside her. "I resigned when I got married. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time." "What a waste," Lydia said bluntly. "The art world needs more people who can speak about beauty without pretension. If you ever want to get back into it, call me." Later, as they walked around the gallery, Sebastian was unusually quiet. "You okay?" Isabella asked. "You resigned because of our marriage," Sebastian said, stopping in front of one of Temperance's larger pieces. "I never asked you to do that." "I know. But everything was so uncertain, and I thought that you might not stay." Isabella looked at him, noting the tension in his jaw. "Maybe. Or that you might not want me to." Sebastian turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense in the gallery lighting. "Isabella, I want you to take that job." "What job?" "Whatever Lydia Blackstone offers you. I want you to have your own career, your own life, your own accomplishments that have nothing to do with being my wife." "Why?" "Because I want you to choose me every day, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you want to be." Before Isabella could respond, a commotion near the gallery entrance caught their attention. A man in an expensive suit was arguing with gallery security, his voice carrying across the room despite the ambient noise. "I don't care if it's a private event. I have business with Sebastian Palmer." Isabella felt Sebastian tense beside her. "Damn it. Who is that?" "Thaddeus Moorcock, my grandfather's former business partner." Sebastian's voice was grim. "He's been trying to contest the will." The man, Thaddeus, spotted Sebastian and began making his way across the gallery, ignoring the security guards trailing behind him. He was perhaps 70, with sharp features and the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting his way. "Sebastian!" Thaddeus's voice boomed across the space, causing conversations to pause and heads to turn. "We need to talk." "This isn't the time or place, Thaddeus." "Isn't it? I understand congratulations are in order." Thaddeus's eyes landed on Isabella, and she felt immediately uncomfortable under his scrutiny. "Mrs. Palmer, I presume?" "Yes," Isabella said evenly, though she moved slightly closer to Sebastian. How convenient that Sebastian found a bride just in time to meet his grandfather's deadline. "Though I have to wonder," Thaddeus smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "What happens when the year is up?" "What are you talking about?" Isabella asked. Sebastian's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Thaddeus, that's enough." "Oh, she doesn't know about the other condition." Thaddeus looked delighted. "How fascinating. Tell me, my dear, what do you think happens if your marriage doesn't last the full year?" Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "What other condition?" "Thaddeus, stop!" Sebastian's voice was dangerous. "The marriage has to last 12 months, Thaddeus continued, ignoring Sebastian's warning. 12 months from the wedding date, or everything reverts to the company shareholders, which means, my dear girl, that if you leave him before next October, Sebastian loses everything anyway. The gallery seemed to spin around Isabella. A year. They had to stay married for a full year, or Sebastian would lose his inheritance regardless. Is that true? She asked quietly, looking at Sebastian. The guilt in his expression was answer enough. Sebastian, Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. Is that true? Yes. The single word hit her like a physical blow. Another condition, another secret, another reason to question whether anything between them was real. Well, Thaddeus said, looking pleased with the chaos he'd created, this has been illuminating. Sebastian, do give me a call when you're ready to discuss reasonable alternatives to this charade. As Thaddeus walked away, leaving them standing in the middle of the gallery with curious eyes watching their every move, Isabella felt the careful foundation they'd been building crumble beneath her feet. Isabella, Sebastian said desperately, let me explain. Not here. Isabella's voice was steady, but Sebastian could see the hurt in her eyes. Not in front of all these people. They left the gallery in silence, Temperance's worried eyes following them as they made their way to the exit. In the car, the tension was suffocating. Why didn't you tell me? Isabella asked finally, as they pulled into the parking garage beneath Sebastian's building. Because I was afraid you'd think exactly what you're thinking right now. Which is what? That this is all about the money. That I'm keeping you here against your will for financial gain. Isabella was quiet as they rode the elevator to the penthouse, her mind racing with implications. A year. They had to make it a year. How long? She asked as they entered the apartment. How long what? How long have we been married? Sebastian looked confused by the question. 11 days. So we have 51 weeks left. Isabella, 51 weeks of you wondering if I'm going to leave and cost you your inheritance. 51 weeks of me wondering if you're only being kind because you need me to stay. Isabella sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. How is that fair to either of us? Sebastian sat down beside her, careful to maintain distance. What if we made it fair? How? What if I signed everything over to you? Isabella's head snapped up. What? The inheritance, when it comes through. I'll sign it all over to you. That way, if you stay, it's because you want to. If you leave, you're not costing me anything. You're taking what's rightfully yours for putting up with this mess. Sebastian, that's millions of dollars. That means nothing to me if you're not choosing to be here freely. Isabella stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the desperate hope that she would understand what he was offering. You would do that? Give me everything? Isabella, Sebastian said softly, I would give you everything anyway. The inheritance is just money. You're my life. And as Isabella looked at this man who was willing to risk his entire fortune just to prove that her choice to stay was her own, she realized that maybe the one-year condition wasn't a trap after all. Maybe it was an opportunity to build something real enough to last a lifetime. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed, their bed, technically, though they'd never shared it, staring at the ceiling and thinking about choices, real choices versus the illusion of choice, freedom versus security, love versus convenience. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and padded to the kitchen, where she found Sebastian sitting at the island with his laptop open and papers scattered around him. He looked up when she entered, his hair disheveled and his eyes tired. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. I was working on something. Sebastian gestured to the papers. Legal documents, making good on what I promised you earlier. Isabella moved closer and saw official-looking documents covered in dense legal text. You're actually doing it, signing everything over to me. I had my lawyers draw up the papers. If you'll accept it, everything goes into your name the moment the inheritance clears. Sebastian's voice was matter-of-fact, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders. No strings attached, no conditions. It'll be yours to do with as you please. Sebastian. Isabella sat down across from him, studying his face in the soft kitchen lighting. Why? Because I need you to know that this, us, isn't about money anymore. It can't be, if we're going to have any chance of making this work. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the marble countertop. Can I ask you something honestly? Always. If there was no inheritance, no will, no conditions, if we had met under completely normal circumstances, do you think you would have noticed me? Sebastian set down his pen, giving her question the serious consideration it deserved. I don't know, he said finally. The honest answer is that I don't know because I was a different person before all this started. I was closed off, focused on work, convinced that I didn't need anyone. Isabella felt something sink in her chest, but Sebastian wasn't finished. But Isabella, I know who I am now. I know what it feels like to come home to someone who makes me laugh. I know what it's like to want to be better for someone else. I know what it's like to be terrified of losing something that matters more than business deals or family expectations. He reached across the table to cover her hand with his. So maybe I wouldn't have noticed you before, but I see you now. And I choose you now, even if it costs you everything. Especially if it costs me everything. Because what good is everything if I'm alone with it? Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. This man, who had been raised in wealth and privilege, who had built an empire on calculated decisions and strategic thinking, was willing to give it all up for the possibility of something real with her. There's something I need to tell you, she said quietly. Sebastian's hand tightened slightly on hers. Okay. Lydia Blackstone called me yesterday before the gallery opening. She offered me a position as assistant curator at her gallery. It's a good job, Sebastian. Really good. The kind of job I've dreamed about. That's wonderful. Sebastian's smile was genuine, though Isabella could see the question in his eyes. It's also in New York. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Sebastian's hand went very still on hers. New York, he repeated quietly. I haven't given her an answer yet. I told her I needed to think about it. What is there to think about? It's your dream job. Isabella looked at him carefully. Is it? Because, Sebastian, I'm starting to think that maybe my dreams are changing. Isabella, let me finish. She turned her hand palm up under his, interlacing their fingers. 2 weeks ago, if someone had offered me that job, I would have taken it without hesitation. It was everything I thought I wanted. Independence, career advancement, the chance to prove myself in one of the most competitive art markets in the world. And now? Now I find myself wondering what's the point of having everything you thought you wanted if you're not sharing it with someone who matters to you. Sebastian's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's a person. Isabella squeezed his fingers. I'm saying that I don't want the job in New York because I don't want to leave you. Isabella, you can't give up your career for me. I won't let you. I'm not giving up my career. I'm choosing a different one. Lydia also mentioned that she's been looking for someone to help her establish a Boston branch of her gallery, someone with curatorial experience and local connections. Sebastian's eyes widened. She offered you that too? Not exactly. But when I called her back this morning, I suggested it. We're meeting next week to discuss the possibility. You called her back? Isabella nodded. I told her I was interested in staying in Boston and that I might have some ideas for expanding her market presence here. Sebastian stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella could see him processing what she was telling him. You're staying, he said quietly. I'm staying. Even though you know about the year requirement? Even though you know that people will say you're only here for the money? Sebastian, let them say whatever they want. I know why I'm here, and you know why I'm here. That's all that matters. Sebastian stood up so suddenly that his chair scraped against the floor. For a moment, Isabella thought he was going to leave, but instead he walked around the island and pulled her into his arms. Isabella, he whispered against her hair, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound and terrifying and wonderful all at once. I love you too, Isabella whispered back, and felt Sebastian's arms tighten around her. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet kitchen while the city slept around them. When they finally pulled apart, Sebastian framed her face with his hands. So, what happens now? He asked. Now we figure out how to be married for real. Not because of wills or deadlines or family pressure, but because we choose each other. And the inheritance? Isabella glanced at the legal documents scattered across the counter. Keep it. Use it to build something good. But Sebastian, yeah? Never again. No more secrets. No more protecting me from difficult truths. If we're going to do this, we do it together, completely honest, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Sebastian leaned down to kiss her, and this time it wasn't gentle or tentative. It was deep and sure and full of all the words they hadn't said yet, all the promises they were making to each other in the quiet of their kitchen at 3 in the morning. When they broke apart, Isabella was breathless. So, she said, trying to keep her voice light, I should probably move my things into your room. Our room. Sebastian's smile was slow and warm and absolutely devastating. I thought you'd never ask. As they gathered up the legal documents and turned off the lights, Isabella realized that this, standing in a kitchen with the man she loved, making plans for a future they would build together, this was exactly the kind of fairy tale she had never allowed herself to believe in. But maybe the best fairy tales weren't about princes rescuing princesses. Maybe they were about two people choosing each other, again and again, until the choice became as natural as breathing. And maybe, Isabella thought as Sebastian took her hand and led her toward their bedroom, that was the most magical thing of all. Isabella's hands were shaking as she stood in the doorway of Sebastian's bedroom, their bedroom now. The space that had once felt impossibly grand and intimidating now felt intimate, charged with possibility and the weight of the choice they had just made. Sebastian stood by the window, his back to her, shoulders tense despite the love they had just confessed. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked softly. Sebastian turned, and in the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Isabella could see vulnerability written across his features. "Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Isabella stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence between them. "Sebastian," she said, moving closer, "I need you to know something." He went very still. "What?" "When I told you I'd never been with anyone before on our wedding night, that wasn't just nervousness talking." Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. "I meant it, literally." The confession hung in the air between them, and Isabella watched as understanding dawned in Sebastian's eyes, followed immediately by something that looked like reverence. "Isabella," he breathed, "are you sure about this? About us? Because once we what?" she challenged gently, stepping closer until she was within touching distance. "Once we stop pretending this is just a business arrangement, once we admit that this is real." Sebastian's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. "Once I love you the way you deserve to be loved, I'm never going to be able to let you go." "Good," Isabella whispered, rising on her toes to meet his lips, "because I'm never going to want you to." The kiss was different from any they had shared before, deeper, more urgent, filled with months of careful restraint finally breaking free. Sebastian's hands tangled in her hair, and Isabella could feel years of loneliness and isolation melting away under his touch. "Isabella," he murmured against her lips, "are you absolutely certain? Because we can wait." "Sebastian Palmer," Isabella interrupted, pulling back to look into his eyes, "if you're going to overthink this, I'm going to have to take charge." The surprise that flickered across his face was quickly replaced by something heated and wonderful. "Is that a threat or a promise?" "Both," Sebastian laughed, a sound of pure joy that Isabella had never heard from him before, and lifted her off her feet, spinning her once before setting her down gently. "In that case," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, "I surrender completely." What followed was tender and passionate, and nothing like the clinical transaction Isabella had feared on their actual wedding night. Sebastian was patient, gentle, reverent, treating her like something precious that he couldn't quite believe was his. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, the words falling from his lips like a prayer. "I love you, I love you, I love you." And Isabella, who had spent her whole life being strong for everyone else, finally allowed herself to be vulnerable, to be cherished, to be loved completely. Later, as they lay tangled together in sheets that now smelled like both of them, Isabella traced lazy patterns on Sebastian's chest. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. What changed? Between our wedding night and now, I mean. When did you start to fall in love with me?" Sebastian was quiet for so long that Isabella wondered if he'd fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I think it was the morning after our wedding. When you came into the kitchen wearing my shirt, and you looked so at home, like you belonged there, like you belonged with me." His arm tightened around her. "But I knew for certain when you stood up to Genevieve, wait, no, when you stood up to my mother, you were magnificent." "I was terrified. You were brave. There's a difference." Sebastian pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "What about you? When did you know?" Isabella considered the question. "I think it was when you offered to sign everything over to me. Not because of the money, but because you were willing to give up everything just to prove that my choice to stay was my own. And now? Now I know that the best decisions aren't always the safe ones. Sometimes you have to risk everything for the possibility of something extraordinary." Sebastian shifted to look down at her, his blue eyes serious in the dim light. "Isabella, I want you to know that whatever happens with the inheritance, with the business, with any of it, you're my choice. Not because of my grandfather's will or family pressure or anything else. You're my choice because you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. And what man is that? Someone worthy of your love." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "Sebastian, you were always worthy. You just needed to believe it yourself. They talked until dawn, sharing stories and secrets and dreams for the future. Isabella learned that Sebastian had wanted to be a teacher when he was young, before family expectations steered him toward business. Sebastian discovered that Isabella had once dreamed of opening a small art gallery in a cozy town where everyone knew each other's names. "We could do that," Sebastian said, as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the windows. "After we get the Boston Gallery established, we could find a small town somewhere, open something intimate and personal. You would want that? Isabella, I want anything that makes you happy. But more than that, I want to build something with you, something that's ours." As morning broke over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Isabella realized that this was what she had been searching for her whole life without knowing it. Not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but deep, abiding connection. "Sebastian? Thank you. For what?" Isabella lifted her head to look at him, this man who had started as a stranger and become her heart. "For showing me that fairy tales don't always start with once upon a time. Sometimes they start with I do and end with I choose you." Sebastian's smile was soft and full of promise. "Every day, Isabella, I choose you every day." And as they kissed in the morning light, surrounded by the quiet promise of a future they would build together, Isabella knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The best stories, after all, weren't about perfect beginnings. They were about perfect love and the courage to choose it again and again for the rest of their lives. 2 years later, the gallery was small, intimate, nothing like the grand spaces Isabella had once dreamed of managing in major cities. Nestled on the main street of Millbrook, Vermont, a town with more maple trees than traffic lights, the Palmer Gallery felt like a living room where art happened to live. Isabella stood in the morning light streaming through the front windows, adjusting the placement of a watercolor by a local artist. Her wedding ring caught the light as she worked, the simple platinum band now accompanied by a vintage emerald that had belonged to Sebastian's grandmother. Constance had presented it to her last Christmas, saying it was time it had a proper home. "You're going to move that painting 6 more times before you're satisfied with it," Sebastian said from behind her, his voice warm with familiar amusement. Isabella turned to find her husband leaning against the doorframe that separated the gallery from their small office, a cup of coffee in each hand. He looked different than he had 2 years ago, more relaxed, laugh lines more pronounced around his eyes, his expensive suits traded for casual slacks and button-downs that he actually rolled up to help hang paintings. "It's called perfectionism," Isabella said, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. "You should try it sometime." "I did. It nearly cost me the best thing that ever happened to me." Even after 2 years of marriage, Sebastian's casual declarations of love still made Isabella's heart skip. Flatterer, truth-teller. Sebastian moved to stand beside her, studying the watercolor she'd been fussing with, though I think it looked perfect 3 adjustments ago. "Maybe." Isabella leaned into his side, savoring these quiet morning moments before the gallery opened. "Temperance called this morning. The Boston location is exceeding all projections." "Of course it is. My sister has excellent taste in business partners." The Boston branch of the Palmer Gallery had opened 8 months ago, with Temperance as creative director and Lydia Blackston as a silent partner. Isabella split her time between both locations, but her heart belonged here in Millbrook, where tourists came specifically to discover unknown artists and locals stopped by just to chat about beauty. She also mentioned that someone's been asking about commissioning a piece. Isabella continued. "Something about a portrait for their wife's birthday?" Sebastian's cheeks flushed slightly. "I may have inquired about the possibility. Sebastian Palmer, are you planning to surprise me?" "I'm planning to surprise my wife every day for the rest of our lives." Sebastian's free hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. "Is that a problem?" Before Isabella could answer, the bell above the gallery door chimed, announcing their first visitor of the day. An elderly woman entered, followed by a young couple holding hands and looking around with the wide-eyed wonder of people discovering something magical. "Good morning," Isabella called out. "Please, feel free to look around. Let me know if you have any questions." As the visitors dispersed throughout the gallery, Sebastian squeezed Isabella's hand. "I have to drive down to Boston this afternoon for that meeting with the new artist. Want to come with me?" "Can't. I promised Mrs. Henley I'd help her choose something for the library's new reading room." Isabella grinned. "Besides, someone needs to mind the store. Mrs. Henley has been choosing something for 6 months, I think she just likes having an excuse to come in and talk about her late husband's painting hobby. Probably, but that's what we're here for, isn't it? Not just to sell art, but to be part of the community. Sebastian studied her face, and Isabella saw the same wonder in his eyes that had been there on their wedding night when she told him she was staying. How did I get so lucky? You took a chance on an arranged marriage to a woman you'd never met. Best business decision I ever made. It wasn't a business decision by the end. No, Sebastian agreed, lifting their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. It was the smartest thing I ever did for love. The young couple approached them, the woman practically glowing with excitement as she pointed to a small oil painting of the Vermont countryside. Excuse me, but could you tell us about this piece? We're getting married next month, and we've been looking for something to mark the occasion. Isabella and Sebastian exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that came from 2 years of building a life together, of learning each other's thoughts and rhythms and dreams. Of course, Isabella said, moving toward the couple with Sebastian beside her. Let me tell you about the artist. As they shared the story of the painting, a local farmer who had started creating art in retirement and discovered a talent he never knew he had. Isabella felt the same warm satisfaction she experienced every day in this new life they'd built. Later that evening, after Sebastian returned from Boston with stories of promising new artists and Temperance's latest dramatic pronouncements, they sat on the porch of their small house behind the gallery. The October air was crisp, painting their breath in small clouds, and the maple trees surrounding their property blazed with color. The artist I met today, Sebastian said, his arm around Isabella as they shared a blanket on the porch swing. She reminded me of you. How so? The way she talked about her work, like each piece was a conversation with someone she hadn't met yet, but hoped to connect with. Sebastian pressed a kiss to Isabella's temple. That's what you do here, you know. You don't just sell art, you create connections. Isabella smiled, thinking about Mrs. Henley and her endless deliberations, about the young couple who had left with their first piece of art as a married couple, about all the conversations and stories and small moments of beauty that filled their days. Speaking of connections, she said, I have something to tell you. Sebastian's arm tightened slightly around her. Good something or concerning something? Depends on how you feel about our family expanding. Sebastian went very still. Isabella, I saw Dr. Morrison yesterday. I'm 8 weeks along. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of wind through maple leaves and the distant call of geese flying south. Then Sebastian was turning her to face him, his hands cupping her face, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You're pregnant? Isabella nodded, suddenly nervous. They had talked about children, dreamed about them, but dreams and reality were different things. I know we said we'd wait until the galleries were more established, but nothing. Sebastian's kiss cut off her worried words. Isabella, this is perfect. You're perfect, our timing is perfect, even though it's sooner than we planned. The best things in my life have never gone according to plan. Sebastian's thumb brushed across her cheek. I married a stranger and found my soulmate. I thought I needed control and discovered I needed love. I planned for a business arrangement and got a fairy tale instead. And now we're going to be parents. Sebastian's smile was brilliant in the gathering dusk. In Millbrook, Vermont, running an art gallery and raising a family and proving that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where you're supposed to be. As they sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one over their small town, Isabella marveled at the journey that had brought them here. 2 years ago, she had been a woman agreeing to marry a stranger out of family obligation. Now she was a wife, a business owner, a soon-to-be mother, and most importantly, a woman deeply and completely loved. Isabella, Sebastian's voice was soft in the darkness. Thank you. For what this time? For saying yes to an impossible situation and turning it into the most beautiful life I could have imagined. Isabella settled deeper into his embrace, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on her still flat stomach where their child was growing. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it starts with coffee in the morning and grows into forever. And as they swayed gently on their porch swing, surrounded by the peace of their chosen home and the promise of their growing family, Isabella knew that this was exactly the ending she would have written for herself, if she had been brave enough to dream it. Some love stories began with passion, some began with friendship. Theirs had begun with a choice, and every day since, they had chosen each other again. That, Isabella thought as Sebastian's hand covered hers over their unborn child, was the most beautiful love story of all. After watching Isabella and Sebastian's journey from a cold arranged marriage to deep, genuine love, would you take the risk Isabella took, choosing to stay with someone who initially married you for practical reasons, believing they could change and that real love could grow? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.